Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I see the time is already at 1 minute past 10, South African time. So if we can just give it maybe 2 more minutes to have other people join, and we will kickstart our session. Perfect. I think we will kickstart the session due to time, and anybody who joins us will then catch on the conversation as we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Boost Insurance Business Efficiency and Compliance with AP Automation, brought to you by ISB Optimus and Yooz. My name is Melissa Mabuza, and I'll be your host for today's session. We have an exciting lineup of industry experts who will share real-world insights on how automation is transforming finance and procurement processes. Before we begin, a quick housekeeping note will be taking place. So please feel free to submit your questions in our Q&A box at any time. We'll address all questions at the end of the session. So we'd really also like your feedback on this session. Next will be the webinar will be recorded, and we will send through, we'll share with you this recording to all the registered attendees. If we look at our agenda for today, it is jam-packed. We have, so we'll go through what we can expect on this agenda. So we'll first start with meeting our experts. We'll then kick off with insights into navigating the evolving regulations, landscape, and streamlining operation for greater agility. Next, we'll explore how modern AP processes and revolutionizing financial workflow and reducing friction. Then we'll dive into Yooz powerful automation tool designed to simplify procure to pay from end to end. Finally, we'll also look into going into the live demo, see Yooz in action. This hands-on demonstration will showcase real-world application and time-saving features. Finally, we'll go into the Q&A that we have requested for you to pop through questions. So we'll open the floor for questions, and our experts will provide you with clarity and actionable advice. Now, we have our panel, our speakers. First speaker for the day will be Mr. Clifford Mark. So Mr. Mark is a head of strategic project at Nedbank Insurance, a division of Nedbank with over 20 years of professional experience. Clifford has a strong track record in delivering and strategy execution across consulting, finance, project management, and business leadership. Mr. Mark leads the transformation of Nedbank Insurance across multiple fronts, including launching new products, digitizing key products, and enhancing client experiences. Clifford is the founding and accountable executive of MyCover personal lines offering. Before joining Nedbank Insurance, Clifford served as the Chief of Staff to the Wealth Cluster Group Managing Executive, where he connected various disciplines and supports the Group Executive's office in key strategic and operational matters. Clifford holds a CA South Africa designation and an MBA from Warwick Business School, UK. He is a former vice president of Insurance Institute of Gauteng. A mouthful. I love it. Our next speaker will be Mr. Brian Mudukwani, a seasoned executive with an established track record in the management consulting sector, currently serving as a partner and chief executive officer at a prestige firm specializing in process improvement. Proficient in operations management, project management, business analysis, and business process management, with a focus in implementing innovative solutions such as robotic processes, automation, cognitive automation, artificial intelligence, digital workforce analytics. Adaptive as designing, executing, and optimizing enterprise resource planning, ERP systems, that is, to drive business transformation and operational excellence. He is committed to rather delivering exceptional client services and fostering collaborative relationships within the industry. Our last speaker will be Mr. Matthew Farquhar. I did practice the surname, so mind me, please forgive me if I'm butchering it. Mr. Matthew is the senior sales consultant for the international sales division of Yooz, with his experience spanning across more than a dozen countries. Matthew has an extensive background in both document and process automation. I don't know about everybody, but I'm excited to hear from these experts. They come with a great knowledge of background of knowledge, that is. So I'm excited to hear from them. However, without further ado, let's kick things off with Mr. Clifford. Handing over to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and good morning to the audience in attendance and to the ISA team. Thank you for the opportunity to share some knowledge around automated payments. So looking forward to the conversation. Please do pop through as many questions as you can. But on my side, where I really want to leave the audience today is to give you a sense around really four things. Firstly, an understanding of what the market pressures are in terms of what does the landscape of automation look like from a business perspective. I'm hoping to give everyone a sense around some of the regulatory complexities with automating payments. And I'll also leave everyone with a little bit of a soundbite around the operational efficiencies that the business will be able to harvest and benefit from automating payments, as well as a little bit of a practical approach to some of the recommendations in the process to think about how to automate. And then I'll hand over to the next speaker. So moving on to the next slide. I don't know about you, but if you read any newspaper, any online article, there's a lot of sense around businesses are automating a lot of processes. Or we've seen a video just last week with a robot doing a whole lot of activities. That's a whole different level of automation. Insofar as, when we think about the insurance industry and bringing it closer to us, it's really some of the key processes that the businesses are considering and already implementing from an automation perspective. We've seen businesses focusing on the new business process. How can the new business process be automated, improving the client experience or the client engagement processes by leveraging automated processes so that it minimizes the handoffs between different systems. We've seen also how back-end processes can be managed to improve different workflows and processes that organizations actually process. And lastly, we also look at the claims and underwriting processes where a lot of organizations are certainly looking towards optimizing and improving, because ultimately, as insurance companies, it all boils down to managing claims and the underwriting process. But today, we're going to focus on one of those crown jewels, which is the accounts payable process. So, if we move into the next slide, some of the things that, when we start looking at the considerations on the accounts payable process, I think what I'd like to start off by highlighting and positioning with the audience is I think there's a lot of insight and process and thinking that needs to be considered when you start looking at the complexity involved when an organization starts thinking about automating. So when you're automating payments to vendors, to suppliers that are involved in your claims process, or for any administrative expenses or operational or items of an operational nature that are involved in an organization, I think one of the first things to think about is the volume and scale. Is it simple or is it complex? Invoices, payments that need to be made. Because I think starting with that and having a strategic view around the nature and the simplicity and complexity of it, start giving you a sense of where you could potentially pick up low-hanging fruit, but also you can have an approach that assists you to build into a roadmap around complexity. And I know Brian's going to pick up a little bit around the journey of automating. So that almost gives a nice segue to Brian when he comes in a little bit later. What I also want to just chat about is the regulatory perspective. When you start designing your automation, there's different ways. We've seen how organizations implement automation through either robotics, simple AI tools that are either built in-house in the organization or used by third parties. So I know Matt's going to touch a little bit about some of those opportunities and what that looks like. But I think insofar as how I would like to help you to think about this as the community here is, if we take some examples, from a regulatory perspective, we know in the automation of payments, one has to think about things, for example, like VAT. There's regulatory processes when you make payments to suppliers today in the manual environment. I remember back in my days in finance, you would take an invoice, try and look for the 6 things that should be on any invoice. Does it have a date? Does it have the supplier? Does it have your organization's details, VAT details? And those things basically are the elements that reflect the regulatory requirements of any invoice. So if you can imagine, if you automate that process, you need to build in the regulatory rules that are required to make sure that the automation process actually takes those into account. In the worst case that those rules aren't really taken into account, what organizations are likely to experience is a situation where you actually pay for invoices that are non-compliant. And for example, when it comes to your SARS audits or SARS refunds or VAT returns being investigated, you won't be able to claim, for example, your VAT. Or not be able to claim some of those invoices for tax purposes. So building and taking into account that regulatory environment is quite important when you look at automating your accounts payable process. I'd also like to segue into the analytics and scenarios that organizations need to consider. So I'll start off with an example. If you think about it, when you are planning to automate, examples could center around things such as, are you able to understand your trends? If you know, for example, in your business, every single month you pay an estimated amount, say you pay 100 million Rand every month in your expenses, you can actually build in your base and information of how you believe that the performance should be around payments. So if you automate and then the next thing you see at the end of the month that you've paid 1 billion Rand when you've ordinarily been paying a certain baseline amount of payments, then there's potentially an issue with your robotics. So looking at that and having actuals versus expected built into the analysis of the robot makes sure that you can build the credibility around the analytics process. I think combining that, I'd also add in the element of business rules. So as you can imagine, in most of our organizations, we have SODAs. A SODA says, the accounts payable clerk can pay all invoices up to 10,000 rands. Above this amount, there's an accounts manager that would review and sign. And at this level, maybe the finance manager gets involved in signing off some of the invoices. Taking those points into account, I think what's really important to position is that look at your environment as it stands today. What are those SODAs, that basically guide the organization in terms of what you currently do today in your manual process? Bake in and review to say, like, if you automated your processes, how would you take that sort of process to make sure that it's quite clear? Maybe you might decide when you automate that there's actually no need for several number of steps or several set of approvals. Or you could also decide that for the robot, based on your risk appetite, maybe you don't approve payments above 100,000 from an automation perspective. Those will still go through the normal process. So by building in and guiding that starts giving you a good regulatory framework of what to build when you're looking at it internally in your organization. Then I think this slide can't be completed without having a discussion of what are the considerations around fraud. I know, when I spoke just now about the risk appetite, organizations look very closely at the elements of, will the bot actually result in potential issues from a fraud perspective? And this looks at potential leakages of funds out of the organization. And some things that one would think about is when you're in the manual environment today and you're currently reviewing your invoices, there are things that you check. For example, does the invoice have amounts that have been TPEXed off? And you can almost see that the number has actually been edited. And so when you're building your automation, you can actually build in to check things like image alteration being built in it. And by doing that, you almost prevent fraud from happening onto your automation process. And that really starts building the credibility on it. And hopefully that gives everybody a sense of the regulatory considerations that companies need to think about. And I'll move into the next slide. So here I would just like to talk specifically around operational efficiencies. If you've automated your process, think about in a claims environment or in an organization perspective, suppliers are now essentially being paid much faster and much quicker. Depending on your SLAs that you've built for your bot, you will potentially take out hours, if not days, out of the process. And that reduces all the call time that clients and SPs used to call in to try and check in what the progress is with the payment of the invoice. For the staff members who don't have to be processing all of the payment information as they did in the past, then that also frees up time for the staff to actually be able to focus on higher value opportunities. And I'll give you an example. If you look at in a claims environment, depending on what your organizational structure looks like from a claims perspective, but if you take companies that have claims agents that operate on a cradle to grave approach. So that basically means the agent does all the work from the time that the claim is notified into the organization and is registered until the settlement of the claim. Loading payments is still a job to be done for that particular agent. So removing that and actually allowing a claims handler to not worry about having to finalize and process the payments to suppliers for claims that are in close to finality actually frees up their time. And that means you've got more time to answer the phone, more time to respond to queries, and actually overall will improve your net promoter scores. Then the last thing I want to just chat with these 2 points at the bottom around the auditing of the bots is, if you think about it, a bot, especially in an accounts payable environment, would create an opportunity where as I mentioned before, there's potential slippage, leakage, potential fraud that might happen. The ability of an organization to build in controls. How do you build automated controls to be able to, whether it's on a daily, weekly basis, to be able to unpack and see that all of the rules that have been built in have been adhered to in the system. And by doing that, you can improve your reporting processes as an example, because you've got better credibility where maybe it used to take you 5 days to complete your month-end process. You've automated a lot of the accounts payable related processes. You're balancing with your suppliers much quickly and are able then to close out your reporting process much earlier on, which I think is a fantastic benefit. And then I'll move into what essentially is my next slide. I just want to leave the team with some recommendations. So firstly, as you go through this journey as an organization, depending on where you sit, firstly, benchmarks are quite difficult to get because information around how well organizations are automating tends to be quite difficult. I was quite impressed. You'll see later, Matt's got some stats around how automation and organizations are doing. So we're fortunate on this call to have that kind of information, but a lot of companies out there actually don't have access to that. So the first point is to look at, what's the volume of payments we do, what's the effort we put in, and how can we actually be able to identify what our baseline level of payments and structure looks like, and then essentially be able to determine the flow of how much do we think if we automate, we'll be able to save time, be able to, create efficiencies in the organization. Once you have that, you're able to build into a business case. And then you can track your business case to compare what your actuals and expected were in your model. And then that actually can start building credibility. And what I always say to organizations is, I think be okay to build in a little bit of room for failure. When you're going through the journey of automation, it doesn't all work out immediately at the beginning. There might be bugs, fixes, rules that haven't been taken into account. So I think having an agile business case where you can revise and check that, I think is a good place to be in. And the last point is, once a payment has been made and it's left the organization, it's probably a lot more difficult to recover unless you have an existing relationship already with certain suppliers. Then at least you'll be able to get the funds. But if it was a once-off payment, organizations have a lot of difficulty with that. So as you automate, always think about the risk that's involved in the process. Hopefully that gives everyone a sense around the contextual and business overview and process required into the consideration. And I'm going to hand over back to you, Melissa and Brian, for the next slot.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Clifford. I think that was very insightful, drawing the picture of how including automation into your business processes, has operational efficiencies and those case studies that need to be done around that. So thank you for that. Looking at then our next speaker, who will be Brian, Mr. Brian Mutukwani. Please, can you take us through and take it away on your next topic?
Thank you very much. And a very special thank you to the IISA, Yooz, and the ISB Optimus team for this wonderful opportunity to be part of today's conversation. So as we've just heard, insurers are under significant pressure to streamline operations while ensuring full compliance with complex regulatory and accounting requirements. AP is one of the most vital, but also one of the most overlooked areas when it comes to meaningful automation. This is where volume, risk, and compliance intersect, often with costly consequences, as Clifford has just alluded to. In this segment, I'd like to share how ISB Optimus helps insurers overcome these challenges, not through generic automation, but through a purpose-built, process-centric approach that we call PODTA. It's an abbreviation for Process Optimized Digital Transformation Accelerators. These accelerators are pre-built, insurance-specific process models that incorporate regulatory obligations such as IFRS standards and VAT treatment, accounting and reporting requirements, and embedded business rules, risks, and controls that define how automations should behave, not just technically, but operationally and also in terms of compliance. My focus today is not on the automation toolset itself. Matthew from Yooz will guide us through that shortly. My job for now is to show you how we ensure your automation project starts with the right business logic and process foundation, and how this dramatically reduces risk, accelerates the deployment, and drives measurable outcomes from day one. Okay, so let's begin by grounding ourselves in the regulatory and operational realities that shape the design of our AP invoice processing model for insurers. Okay. So at ISB Optimus, we've developed a pre-built AP invoice processing model specifically tailored for the insurance industry. As I said earlier, this is not a generic process template. It's a rigorously designed framework that reflects the realities of how insurance, finance, and compliance functions operate. First and foremost, the model is built on Porter, our process-optimized digital transformation accelerators. These are ready-to-deploy process frameworks that align to APQC process classification standards. You may be familiar with the PCF framework. They also reflect local and international regulatory and accounting frameworks such as IFRS, VAT treatment rules, the POPI Act, and so on. They also include embedded business rules, risk controls, and authorization matrices tailored to the insurance operating model. For example, if your delegation of authority specifies that only finance managers may approve invoices above a certain threshold, that logic is not left to the tool configuration team. It's already embedded in the process model, so it's governed and auditable by design. This means that your organization benefits from a compliance by design approach, which is particularly important when auditability, traceability, and regulatory scrutiny are not optional. The second major benefit is risk reduction. Because the model is insurance specific and already tested in similar environments, the uncertainty and guesswork usually associated with process reengineering is removed. What you're deploying has been proven to work in this sector. And finally, we achieve a faster time to value because you're not starting from a blank sheet. You're able to implement transformation rapidly without compromising on quality or control. This makes the shift from simple to complex automation much smoother and safer. So in short, our AP process model is a business-first solution underpinned by proven controls and regulatory alignment, so that when automation happens, it is structured, secure, and ready to deliver measurable value from the outset. Okay. When we talk about automation in a function as sensitive as AP or accounts payable, particularly in the insurance industry, the conversation must begin with governance. And that governance must begin at the process level, not at the technology level. At ISB Optimus, we've developed an AP invoice processing model that embeds regulatory, accounting, and audit requirements directly into the business process. This means that rules, risks, and controls are consistently applied across all systems that interact with the AP process, whether it's the Yooz automation platform, to your ERP, to downstream reporting and audit platforms. For example, our model includes VAT validation logic based on supplier type, invoice category, and jurisdiction, preventing invalid submissions from being processed and protecting the organization from financial and compliance risk. Accounting controls like three-way matching, invoice, PO, and goods receipt, cost center validation, and cutoff enforcement are also pre-built. These are not just best practices, they're essential to ensuring financial integrity, accurate accruals, and timely close cycles in line with IFRS general accounting principles, and also IFRS for SMEs where applicable. Beyond this, our governance framework is aligned to recognized standards. SOSO, or some might want to call it COSO, but I think the correct one is SOSO, COSO, for internal controls, segregation of duties, and fraud risk mitigation. King 4, supporting ethical governance, transparency, and accountability. The POPI Act, to ensure proper handling of supply and invoice-related personal data, and local compliance frameworks such as the VAT Act. These standards are not just referenced, they are codified into the process logic. Another example is if your delegation of authority limits invoice approval to finance managers above 100,000, that becomes a government control point in the workflow, not a manual check and not subject to interpretation. Because these controls are baked in at the process layer, they're enforced automatically and consistently across all your technologies, whether it's invoice capture in Yooz, approvals in your workflow, or final payment processing in your ERP, the same rules and controls will apply. This will ensure that your automation efforts do not bypass governance, they reinforce it. The result is an AP process that is compliant by design, transparent by default, and audit ready at every step. Now, with so many moving parts in a transformation program, regulatory obligations, complex systems, legacy processes, and evolving stakeholder needs, clients need more than just a tool provider. They need a partner who can bring everything together under a clear, structured, and outcome-focused transformation plan. At ISB Optimus, our role is exactly that. We act as the orchestrator in all of this, ensuring that the right process frameworks, governance structures, and technology components come together in a way that delivers tangible, measurable business value. Our clients in the insurance industry don't have the luxury of experimenting with unproven approaches. That's why we deploy our Porter framework, which is a set of process accelerators and governance models specifically built for insurance finance, regulatory reporting, and operational controls. This dramatically reduces the guesswork and enables a faster, more confident deployment of automation. We work side by side with our clients, with our client teams to ensure alignment with industry standards and audit requirements, internal policies such as delegation of authority, and technology realities across platforms like Yooz, FlowGear, and most ERP systems and reporting tools. The result is a transformation that delivers operational efficiency in terms of streamlined approvals, reduced manual effort, and shorter AP cycles. Regulatory compliance, controls and documentation built in, not bolted on. Scalability, essentially a model that grows with your business, whether it's volume, complexity, or geography. So whether you're just beginning your automation journey or looking to scale up responsibly, we guide you through it with structure, expertise, and a relentless focus on outcomes. This is what we mean when we talk about transformation that is orchestrated with confidence. So up to this point, we've focused on the structured foundation that makes real AP transformation possible. The governance, the process logic, and the control framework that we built into our Porter model. But governance and process design are only part of the story. To realize real business value, these well-defined processes need to be executed consistently and intelligently. That's where automation platforms like Yooz come in. The beauty of our approach is that we don't start with technology. We start with the business rules. What needs to be approved, who must approve it, and under what conditions, what should trigger a review, an alert, or an audit trail. How should exceptions be handled? These are all questions that we ask and try and address upfront before we even start talking about the technology. The decisions are not left to the implementation team to interpret. They're already defined in our model through the pre-built process flows that I spoke about earlier, the risk controls and compliance checkpoints. So when you deploy a platform like Yooz, you're not asking the system what it can do. You're telling it exactly what it must do based on a blueprint that already reflects your regulatory environment, your policies, and your operational goals. So in other words, Yooz doesn't replace our model. It actually activates our model. Yooz becomes the interface through which your predefined governed process is carried out efficiently, consistently, and at scale. And now to show you exactly what this looks like in action, I'd like to hand over to Matthew from Yooz, who will walk us through how their platform brings this process to life in a real-time cloud-based environment. Matthew, over to you.
You are on mute, Matthew. Matthew, you are muted. Apologies, everyone. I think we'll just write down in the group and then he will be able to unmute.
Did we lose him?
No, he's still on the call.
Okay, apologies about that. We're trying to figure out what's happened here. Chloe, is Chloe on the call? May you please give Matthew a ring and just check if everything is all right on his end.
Yeah, sure. I'm checking. Sorry for that. Matthew will
All right.
come back.
All right, thank you. Meanwhile, whilst we're waiting, Alessa, shall we look at some of the polls? Is there another poll that we might want to put up?
Hi, yes, we can put up a poll, but you can potentially just look at the results of the ones we have if you have access, and let's have a chat. So the first one that we put up was, what's your biggest AP challenge in the insurance industry? And 22% of our audience says that it's compliance or audit risks. 33% says that it's manual data entry errors. Another 22% says that it's lack of real-time visibility. And the final 22% says it's fraud detection. The second poll that we had up, what's holding your organization back from AP automation? 27% answered that it's budget constraints. 18% answered that it's resistance to change, whereas the biggest part of this, 45% of the audience said they don't know where to start, they're unsure where to start. And 9% said they're already automated. So well done to those.
You see, 0% answered that it's a lack of IT resources. That is
Yes.
that is uplifting.
Yeah, that is
Okay.
uplifting. And on the previous poll, 0% said slow approval workflow, so no one has a problem with that. Matthew, are you back?
Yes, my computer thought it was the appropriate time to freeze right when it was my turn to speak. So I have joined from my cell phone. I'm gonna have you drive my slides for me, so I'm gonna apologize for you on that. But I'm happy to jump into it now, and apologies for the technical difficulties, everyone. I'll do my best to get this restarted and join back in momentarily. But for the time being, I'll just I'll walk through them now. So
Okay.
if we can just jump to that next slide, I'm ready to go. Perfect. So just a small introduction into who Yooz is. When we initially started the call today, we introduced myself as the senior sales consultant for the international team, and it's a a special place in my heart. Yooz was founded in France and has now expanded into multiple different HQ locations across both the United States and Europe. And we've really seen the market take to the solution quite rapidly. As of today, we see a 40% year-over-year growth in the markets that we are in, and South Africa is one of those target markets. And we continue to see more and more progress in each one of them. Now, one of the key differentiators that you can see here in our Yooz DNA is our dedication to change. And what I mean by that is many of the products that you'll see on the market today, they'll come out with the feature, they'll come out with their standard set of operations, and then they're going to leave it at that. But you can see here, we still invest 25% of our income year over year into research and development to continue to bring new and advanced features to our product to give our clients the best and most effective solution possible. If you could tap it. And as of today, what we have inside of Yooz here is clients in more than 40 different countries, more than 5,000 global clients. And you can see here, it says 300,000 users, 200,000 companies. And why is that different than the clients themselves? So we do partner with a large number of accounting firms. And those accounting firms use Yooz to do the processing for their customers. So you can see it's many different clients, but more users, more companies than physical clients themselves. And I think I'm back in on my laptop, so please let me know if you can hear me still.
We can hear you.
We can hear you clearly.
Perfect.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, excellent. Apologies for that delay. If we pop over to the next slide, it's really just a kind of a profile of who Yooz is as an organization. And Yooz really is a global company. We span across a variety of different countries, a variety of different continents. And we can really be a diverse team, that we have a variety of cultures and teams on our side here. I'm still. We pop over to one more slide. I'm just waiting for it to pull up on my side so I can see what I'm talking about. All right, perfect. If we could go just one more, I think it's going to give us a little bit more insight into who we do business with in South Africa, clients that trust us, as well as companies that we've worked with in the past here. So.
We're on the slide.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. So you can see here, we have had some great success so far in South Africa in a variety of different verticals, a variety of different markets, with a variety of different complexity within each of these companies' AP automation needs. Brian talked about the DAPTA approach and how we can best cater our approach to fit the philosophy of our clients. And what he said was exactly right. It does begin at process level. So when you've created the foundation of a good process, right, now when we build the framework of your automation, we can really achieve some excellent results there. Things like lack of visibility or data capture, some of those problems that we discussed in those first two questions, those are the elements that these companies, when they partnered with Yooz, have been able to tackle on a holistic basis for company-wide organizations. In the next slide, you can see really who are some of our partners. And we don't take this journey alone. When you want to go fast, you go alone. When you want to go far, you go together. So Yooz has created a large partnership network of a variety of different types of partners, such as ISB Optimus, who is our delivery partner in South Africa. We have a great relationship with them, and we're very blessed to be able to have this conversation with you because of them. But you can also see some of the other relationships that we've forged in our time in the market. So with, for example, large accounting firms such as BDO or Deloitte, KPMG, who buy Yooz from us and then sell it on to their clients and use it to process their AP. or the relationships that we have with a variety of different ERP firms. So Infor, SAP, SysPro, Sage, for example. We have direct relationships with these software editors to make sure that our integration into their platform is completely seamless. If you do all the work that you're going to do for accounts payable inside of Yooz and it can't get out into your primary financial system, that work is not very valuable. So we want to make sure that we have seamless and easy integration for you and your team so that when the work is done, it's able to get over into your primary ERP tool or CRM. It's quickness and ease. Now, on the next slide, what I really want to highlight is the push to go to the cloud. Now, Yooz is a completely native, born in the cloud solution. And the reason why I highlight this is you can see a lot of the benefits that are happening as we shift more and more towards the cloud. I have a quote here from Warren Tucker, who's the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at PwC in the UK, and it really outlines what the drive to go to the cloud has done. So organizations that move to modernize their agenda with conviction and clear cloud-powered commercial strategies will create competitive advantages in the market. They will achieve faster value, create flexibility for the future, and most importantly, create value from new tech, IP, and data. Ultimately, that can lead to a sustained advantage in continuous innovation. Now, what I mean by that is when you look at some of these points here on the slide, you can see the advantages that clients or companies are creating for themselves by shifting and being early adopters to cloud technology. So, such as improved decision-making. We talked about lack of visibility on question 1 as being one of the primary issues that people are facing in their AP strategies, right? Having the ability to have platforms and cloud-powered solutions that will drive real-time powered insights is a massive advantage that we can create here with Yooz and other cloud-powered solutions. Another key point here is increased agility. And if you look at those 2 dots, right, that's one of the ones that has the largest gap. And what I mean by increased agility is that when you have a cloud-powered solution at your disposal, we can roll out many different updates throughout the year. Whereas if you're on an on-premise solution, you're probably going to get a patch that's going to take a long time to deploy and roll out, where with this cloud-powered solution, we're just going to go ahead and roll out 2, 3, 4 updates throughout the year seamlessly, and those features will be available for you right away. Now, we also look at faster time to market. And Brian and I have talked about this on a number of different occasions, but how do you get your time to value? You buy something and you want to get the value for what you're buying as fast as possible. If you buy an AP automation solution, ideally, you would like to automate as much AP as possible, as fast as possible, to realize a return on the money that you're investing for that solution. And with a cloud-based solution, the fact that it's much easier to deploy, much easier to set up, and much easier to begin using really activates that time to market so that you can get the value for what you're buying at a much more rapid pace. Now, we talk about the ability to see real-time visibility as well, and that is also going to be something that it leads to enhanced stakeholder trust. So there's quite a bit on this, and this is one of my favorite infographics as we discuss cloud versus some of the older technologies. But I really think it shows the competitive advantages that clients are getting when they're shifting from older technology onto new technology, like, for example, the cloud. Now, on the next slide, there's a holistic view of what Yooz does as a company. Now, we have one single focus, like what I said on that first introduction slide. We are primarily focused on P2P, procurement to pay, and that's our bread and butter. Now, that all starts here at the beginning with the purchase request. Now, Yooz is a unique system in the fact that you do not have to create a purchase request on the platform. So let's say, for example, if you're using SysPro or Infor, Oracle, Sage, you name it, you can create a PO on another platform and still import that in to be matched against. So we have a lot of flexibility as we start there on that left-hand side. And you can, however you're creating the PRPO, you can do it inside of Yooz. You can trigger a specific workflow for it. You can have a number of different governing rules that allow you to have that process flow exactly the way that you'd like. And then logically, once you've created a purchase order from one of your vendors, then you will go in and receive an invoice for it. Now, once this invoice is captured, Yooz has what we call an omni-channel capture. So we don't care if it comes in a PDF, a Word format, an Excel, an image, that doesn't matter to us. We're going to go ahead and extract all the relevant data from that invoice automatically. And just like what Clifford said in the very beginning, there's typically speaking 6 or so things that you want to capture on every single invoice, or else it's going to lead to some problems. So we make those fields required. And then once those are picked up, then we can go ahead and send it on to the review and the approval phases that you can see down there, which are customizable. But if not, then we can send it down a specific rejection phase. So we need to say, okay, we're missing information, we're missing data, it's not compliant. We want to do other things. We want to trigger a different workflow to clarify where this is going to go and how do we solve that. All the way through, now when we pay the invoice, when we export the information back out to your ERP, all of this can happen right here inside of the system. We also have access to a collaborative portal where vendors can upload their invoices for you. Now, on top of our holistic sense down there, you'll see at the bottom, we do a few other things, such as budgeting, digital archiving. We have an active search tool that can create unique and dynamic reports for you, as well as audit functionality and security. And the reason why I want to touch on security as we go on to the next slide is because of the shift and the rise in financial fraud that's happened recently over the course of the last 5-6 years, really in specific. There's been quite a large growth. And as more and more people become used to doing things on the internet, cyber criminals have just become increasingly more creative on how they've gone about targeting companies and individuals. Now, you can see what companies are doing to fight this, right? And you can see the fraud prevention strategies that are being implemented today by business leaders. Now, typically speaking, there's 3 main ways that we're going to do that. So at an organizational level, so internal procedures, internal protocol, right? Or at a behavioral level, right? Where maybe you're teaching and educating your teams of don't click on that phishing link. Don't, download an attachment from someone you don't know, right? But there's also technical measures that are going to go into place on that bluish section of the pie chart there. Now, Yooz is a great example of something that could belong in that technical measures on how we can help combat fraud inside of your business. Now, 42% of companies are committing more and more resources to fighting cybercrime. I'm sure you heard about the example in the US that happened recently where CDK, a large auto manufacturing ERP tool, got held hostage for ransomware and they were down for 2 weeks, right? So this happens to large companies, to small companies, all across the board. And more leaders are shifting more and more resources into keeping their companies safe and preventing the risk of financial fraud. Now, on the next slide, I'll show you what Yooz does to help keep your company safe so that you can realize the value of what's happening here inside the cloud and what's happening here with the new technologies that we're able to do. So with our technology called Yooz Protect, this is really dedicated to be an anti-fraud and a prevention tool for you, as well as being able to audit your AP. Now, you can see we've broken this down into 4 subcategories underneath it: fraud prevention, vendor authentication, user security, and audit, right? And under each one of these trees, there's a variety of different tools that we have now to give you that will help you stay safe on this AP side of things. Now, Clifford had talked about once a fund leaves your bank account and goes to a vendor, it's pretty difficult to get it back unless you have a strong relationship with that specific vendor. If it's a one-time payment, you're very, very infrequently going to get that ever given back to you. So there's a story about Facebook and Google that got defrauded by a man in Lithuania for the tune of $20 million over the course of 3 years. And what this gentleman did is he found their chip supplier. He then found an invoice from them, changed the routing and IBAN information on that invoice to his personal banking information. and he scammed them for close to $20 million. Now, underneath that fraud prevention tree, you can see we have the ability to read the metadata and the text characters inside of the invoices that you're receiving. And we're also going to cross-reference them against the master data that's coming from your ERP solution. So for example, in the scenario that I just shared with you about someone changing the routing information on an invoice that you're receiving, Yooz is going to do an automated cross-reference for you right away so that you can say, okay, this actually doesn't match what we were expecting to see from our vendor. We don't want to make that payment. We don't want to process that invoice. We think that's a bit suspicious. On top of that, Yooz will read the metadata of all of your invoices. It will perform redundancy checks and fraud checks there. It'll also look for vendor banking information, detect an anomaly within your processing behavior. So if a vendor typically is sending you an invoice for 10,000 Rand and all of a sudden they tell you an invoice for 200,000 Rand and it's a bit strange, Yooz will detect that anomaly and flag you to say, hey, this is much, much different than what we're used to getting from this specific vendor. So there's a lot that's happening here to make sure to keep your company safe from potential fraudulent attempts. But that is just a small piece of what Yooz can offer. So with that said, I'm going to dive into the actual platform itself to show you what it looks like as we process invoices. And I'm going to take over the sharing of the screen here. So give me one moment as I pull it over. And here we are. So if you could just give me maybe a thumbs up or anything along those lines when you can see my screen, be greatly appreciated. Beautiful. Thank you very much. Okay. So just like I said, Yooz is a completely cloud-based solution. Everything is handled right here from your web browser. We have a mobile application as well, so you can process on your smartphone. So if you're traveling quite a bit, you're not in front of your desk every day, having that smartphone application is very, very handy. Now I'm going to go ahead and just select my version of the platform that I'd like to take. If you have multiple different entities, you can have multiple different instances for Yooz for each one of those entities. But what you'll see here is when we pull into the platform, I have a few different workspaces here that I can use to my advantage. So we have this capture space right here, which is all about getting invoices into the solution. I'm going to show an example of manually capturing an invoice. The goal here is to not do this, right? The goal here is to automate this in a way that you don't need to come in here and do any of this manual work that I'm showing you right now. The reason why I want to show this to you today is just to give you an example of what it looks like in real time as we process an invoice into the solution. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. Now, most of our clients are either using their cloud document import or the email capture, where if something is emailed to you, we can automatically grab it from your email address and then start the process of uploading it, like you can see here, where the invoice is being uploaded. Now, one thing that you can see here is once we go into my tasks, you can see every invoice, a process that's associated with all of these organizational units. We can always filter it, or we can also restrict user access so that only individuals can see exactly what you want to show them. So if you want to restrict users by location, by department, whatever you'd like to do, we can make sure to have that access restricted for them. Now, in terms of visibility, what you can see here is I can see all of my documents that are within my frame of reference. So I can see my completed invoices. I can see any invoices that would be potentially blocked, or as I process them, I can see where they're going down their logical progression. And then I can also see, any invoice that's considered late or any PO that needs to be raised. Now, when I pull in that invoice, that Makita invoice that I just uploaded in front of you, you can see live and in real time what Yooz has done here to grab the information. And again, I'm going to reference what Clifford said, where he said there's typically speaking a few things that we want to grab from every single invoice. And that's what Yooz is going to do for you. Yooz isn't a template-based solution. Yooz is based on AI. So Yooz is going to read every digit of every page and say, okay, I'm going to grab the pertinent information from this page, and I'm going to pull in things like my invoice number, my invoice date, my PO, that have my supplier information here. So you can see exactly what's being pulled in. Now, this is an example of a PO-based invoice. So you can see that Yooz has also automatically matched the PO against any open purchase order that was available in the system for this vendor. So Yooz went scanned for 2500021, and it's pulled in the relevant purchase invoice lines. So now we can match against that. Now, once we know that this looks good, right, and we say, all right, this is going to check all the boxes that we want to see, we can go ahead and process this through. And now it's gone on to the next phase of the approval process. And you can not only see who's approving it, but you can add them a comment as well. So I'm going to go ahead and send that to Elizabeth for approval. Now, for an example of a non-PO based invoice, right, where we're looking at something that isn't PO based, that is, it's going to come in that's free floating. You can see here when I go into, for example, this Drive South Africa example, what Yooz has done is read this invoice and learned my processing behaviors. So I know, for example, because I've taught Yooz, that every time I get an invoice from Drive South Africa, this is the way that I want that invoice to be coded. So I have the specific vendor, I have the account that I want to pay from, the account method, the currency, and then also down here in my invoice lines, I have the GL I want it to come from, I know the tax code, I know the budget section, I know the cost code, etc. So Yooz is going to emulate the work that you show it over time so that you can continue to have more and more efficiency and greater ease as you continue your processing behaviors. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that as well, and we'll send that on to the next one. Now, when we go into an example like this next one here, this is going to be when you get an invoice in from Yooz for the first time and you need to teach it. This is a great example of it. So you can see Yooz has pulled in the invoice itself. And what it's done is it's read, again, all of the information off this front page. So it doesn't matter how it's formatted, anything like that, it's going to read it all. The only thing that Yooz doesn't know in this example is how you want to code this invoice. So all you need to do is teach it. And I'm going to say, I'm going to call this, let's call it hotel GL. Yep, we'll call it hotel. Now, what we're going to do with this is when we submit this, Yooz is going to then ask to learn this for the next time. So you want Yooz to learn this data for the next document. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Now, the next time I receive an invoice from this vendor, Yooz is going to emulate that work I just did. So you'll say, okay, now I've learned, now I have it. The next time I get an invoice from them, I'm not going to have to go in and do that work again. Yooz will have done it for me. Now, once that's happened, I can see now in my in progress where all my documents have gone on their logical progression. So you can see who needs to approve it, what the organizational unit is that it's associated with, who the recipient is, and then also what their task is to do. So when I go over, I'll just be Nelson, for example. I can see here my two invoices that are ready to be completed and approved before export. So I'll go in here and I'll take a peek at them. And you can see here I have not only my invoice lines, but I can also see what my accounting entries would look like as it gets exported back out into the ERP tool. Right. Now, workflow approval processes wasn't the main thing that people had any issue with, right? When we talked about that during our poll. One of the things that was the largest issue was data and insight, right? So how do we get enhanced visibility? How do we know what's happening inside of the solution? And this is really one of my favorite elements of the tool. So inside of the tab up here at the top, we have a statistics page, right? And this will give you direct insight into everything that is happening within your solution. So you can see the number, the success rate of document extraction, so how well we're reading these invoices. We can also see the number of documents at any phase of the process. So whether they're needing to be reviewed, whether they're needing to be approved, what's going on with them. We can also see number of documents in progress throughout the months, and we can also see global duration times. Also, we can break it down by individual approver, but also by specific vendors. And why I like to hold on this specific vendor part is because let's say, for example, if your average time to approval is 14 days, right? And then you have some vendors that are below that. You're going to have them at 7, 10, 12 days. That's great. But you may have 1 or 2 problem vendors, right, where they're actually sitting closer to 25 or 30 days, maybe even over 30 days for approval on their invoices once they come into the solution. Since we can break this down by specific vendor in this scenario, you'll be able to address outliers in a more efficient manner. So you can say, okay, these are the ones that are taking a little bit more time. These are the ones that are a bit more problematic. Let's go ahead and try to do a little bit more education with this vendor. Let's go ahead and try to tweak this process so that it really can bring them back into the norm. We can improve our average across the board. So not only can we do this for the specific vendors, we can do it for specific organizational units, we can do it for specific approvers within the company. But inside of this page, you're able to get a large number of insights in real-time data about exactly what's happening within your tool. Now, on top of that, we have our dynamic search functionality. And this is a Google-like search bar. And I say it's a Google-like search bar because basically anything that gets read by the system is going to be indexed inside of this tool. So if I don't remember the name of my vendor, for example, but I do know that their address is on Michigan Drive. If I search Michigan Drive in my search bar, I'm going to pull up any invoice that has Michigan Drive on it, right? So it's really, really quite handy because nobody ever comes into your office and says, oh, I can't remember where, who invoiced us, but I know they were on Michigan Drive. I know it happens. I hear stories about it all the time. I know that it's a problem. Now, on top of being able to dynamically search any index word that's been read by the OCR, we can also use this reports functionality to build dynamic reporting for your team. So if you want to come in here and look at any invoice that's waiting to be approved, we can pull up a dynamic report about that. And now, let's say, for example, that Makita invoice that we spent time in earlier, if we say, okay, I actually have now approved this, this will disappear from the list. So this is real, live, dynamic reporting about all the invoices, all the documents that are sitting here stored within Yooz, so that you have the ability to see everything that's happening inside the system. Now we can always go ahead and export this report into your Excel or Microsoft BI. So if you want to have live and real-time reports and you don't even want to open Yooz, you can have a live API-based link into Excel where you can refresh your data without having to open the platform. And you can do that for any of your custom reports. Now, just like what I showed you for invoices waiting to be approved, I'll show you 2 other examples here so I can run by a specific vendor, right? So that one's easy enough. But what we can also do is I can come in here and you can see based on all of these criteria that I have available to play with, even down to custom fields, I can create live and dynamic reports inside of the solution that will show you, let's say I want to do a specific vendor, and I can do a specific time frame, so I can go date. But the reason why I want to show you this is just to show that you can do all of these fields in conjunction with one another. So this can be as simple of a report as you'd like, but it can also be as in-depth of a report as you'd like. So it's really, really quite flexible on how we're able to generate insights for you, how we're able to generate the reports, and then how we're able to deliver them to you, whether you want to access them here on Yooz, whether you want to have them in Microsoft BI or Excel. All of this is really quite quickly available at your disposal. I don't want to dive incredibly deep into the weeds today on this, but I want to make sure I show you that. And then the last piece I'm going to go into today before we go into the questions section is the way that we can manage your processes. Now, Brian already talked about DOPTA and how we can have out-of-the-box solutions that are already tailored for your specific environment, right? And we can absolutely do that. We know the challenges that are facing you in this industry. It's highly regulated. You need to make sure you're hitting the nail on the head the first time. So we have all those ready to go, standard out of the box. But in addition to that, what we have the ability to do is to create some dynamic flexibility here on the tool. So if there's something where maybe you have a bit of nuance in your workflow that might be different than what some of your competitors are doing, or different than maybe industry standard, we can come in here and create unique and dynamic rules here. So we can create, maybe you have one vendor that you want to go to one specific person every time to be approved on dependability systems, and you want to send it to, I'll send it just to myself. We can go ahead and get as granular or as holistic with these workflows as necessary as is required. So while we do have best practices and standard operating procedure that we would typically suggest to this industry, we do maintain the ability to be flexible and customizable when you're looking to set up your workflows. And every single subscription of Yooz has an unlimited number of users, an unlimited number of workflows, an unlimited number of entities. So when we look at how we price out the platform, you're not paying by user license. You're not paying by specific workflows. So you can have as many people on this as you'd like. You can have as many workflows on this as you'd like. And typically what we're seeing when we go into our customer environment is we're seeing very, very, very large reductions in process times and a large amount of time savings that can be translated into physical cost savings, right? So you can free up your team to do more value additive tasks with their time. So with that said, I'm going to yield the screen back over to you, and then we'll go from there. So thank you very much for your attention, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matthew. You've actually broken down the technical side of it very well for us, and taken us through the insightful demo of Yooz. Thank you for that. We really take that in. Our final and next item of the agenda today will be our Q&A session for our panel to answer some questions and see if we can receive any questions from. Do we have any questions on our Q&A panel? If we can just take a second to look into that. If you haven't sent through the Q&A, you can also pop through a question onto the chat box for us, and then we'll be happy to answer any of those questions.
We do have a question.
Happy. From Sandra. Correct. So what happens when standards or regulations are updated or replaced? So that would be a question from our panel, for our panel.
All right. Yeah, I think I can take that. Okay, good. So our process models are version controlled and maintained centrally, right? So when frameworks like, let's say, the VAT Act, the POPI Act, or even your IFRS standards change, right? We will assess the impact on the embedded controls and then update the relevant workflows accordingly. So clients will generally benefit from periodic reviews and can choose to apply updates through structured change control processes. When these changes occur, naturally they will filter to the technology layer, right? Because remember what we said earlier, how the technology works is driven by how you want your organization's processes or process landscape to work. So any change that happens in the process landscape naturally then filters to the technology as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Can I just add, Brian, also, just maybe from a org design perspective, I'd recommend that, like some of the rules, that you always build them with flexibility in the actual design, that you don't build the automation without flexibility. If things are like hard coded, as an example, it becomes quite hard to adjust or change if any regulations change. Like the VAT one, Brian, is a really good example, because we're dealing with different situations in the industry at the moment.
Yeah.
On this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Matthew. Go for it.
I just think it's one of those things where, that's why as a business provider, as a solutions provider, we really rely heavily on having partnerships that are both local and experts, right? So having Brian and Clifford as resources for us as a solution to deploy. We have experts at our disposal to lean on. So when changes in regulation do happen, we work hand in hand to make sure that the product that we're able to deliver is going to meet the standards that are set in place.
Yeah. And also to touch on what Clifford alluded to, right? So all these controls, they are not embedded into the technology. They are sitting in your essentially your process reference library, right? This is what you manage. This is where you manage all those risks, your controls, the processes, and the business rules that define how those processes work. So any changes ideally should be managed in this reference library and not hard coded into the technology. It makes it so much easier if all your business information is centrally managed in a single repository. You just manage the changes there, and any other systems that you may have existing or future will simply make reference to this library that that you're managing external to the technology.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. I hope it addresses your question, Sandra. So our next question is from Temwa Nirenda. The question goes, what role do you see humans playing in the world of automated payments from a training, validation, and risk control perspective? And in a world of automation, will there be a need for the same level of industry expertise? Should we break down that question to the first part?
Yeah, I think so.
Should we break it
I
down?
think it's a
trying
fully
to
loaded
understand.
question, but
Hmm?
I can maybe take the first part. I think
Yes.
humans will definitely still have a part to it, but I think it's when you look in the journey of how your processes work, the main thing is to understand how your process flows work, and there are some process flows or steps where you will always need a level of human intervention, if I was to put it that way. So I was yesterday, I think at work, we were actually chatting about an example of let's just take with where robots are going. You could probably maybe have a robot in your kitchen that breaks the eggs and puts them in the pan, as an example, and then the human's still going to take the food out of the plate or move the plate into the dining area. Or for example, if things get more automated, 60/60 drops the eggs at the gate. In that case, someone still needs to pick up the eggs on the floor from the driver who's delivering that and actually putting them into the house. So, and then only the robot does the work when you're in the kitchen. So similarly with the automated payments process, the way to look at it is to think, what are those steps that you'd automate? And for example, humans will play a bigger part in terms of the validation and the checks, when changes happen, because changes are externally driven. The process around auditing, as an example, would still play a significant part. And obviously some steps where maybe depending on the complexity and the number of systems involved, you can still have more players playing in that part.
True.
Brian, I'm sure you want to sink your teeth into that one.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is it's a very valid question, right, and an excellent one at that, because it rightly reflects the concerns of many professionals in regulated and in high complexity sectors like insurance, and automation is not about replacing human involvement. It's about refocusing it where it adds the most value in the world of automated payments, right? In this particular case, we're talking about AP automation. In the world of automated payments, humans will continue to play critical roles across, I'd say, 2 or 3 core areas, right? The first one that comes to mind, training and configuration. So before any automation can become effective, it must be set up with the correct business logic, authorization limits, compliance rules, all the things that we spoke about earlier, right? So in as much as we've got all those pre-built into that model that I spoke about, there's still plenty scope for customization for an organization's specific needs or an organization's extra special source. What makes you different from your competitor? Where are you finding those extra tenths of performance, right? So they still need for human beings to be involved in those processes, because that setup requires professionals with deep industry knowledge to guide and validate, the process design, particularly around, regulatory treatment, VAT rules, payment timing, and vendor risk. Then the second thing that comes to mind is ongoing validation and oversight, right? So even in a fully automated environment where you've got 80+% straight through processing, which in the world of automation is very, very good, right? Humans will still be needed to monitor exceptions, validate anomalies, and also investigate edge cases, right? For example, if an automated payment deviates from historical trends, or it triggers a fraud risk flag, it must be escalated for review. This is where business acumen and critical judgment are irreplaceable, right? Potentially a third thing as well, risk and control governance, right? So internal audit, compliance, and finance teams will always play a vital role in reviewing process integrity, adjusting risk thresholds, and maintaining policy alignment. So automation enforces the rules, but humans will govern the rules, especially as regulations, tax policies, or business strategies evolve. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And I think within that answer, the next part of the question was, in a world of automation, will there still be a need for the same level of industry expertise? I think you've also alluded into that, Brian, in your last answer, answering that, addressing that.
Gilbert, do you want to add to that, or can I?
No, yeah, happy. I think it's been covered, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Hope you've answered all your questions, Temwa. Our last question that I see is Takunda Hlanga. Has there been any recent developments in addressing fraud detection in the insurance sector? That is our question. Excuse me?
Please come again with the question.
Okay, has there been any recent developments in addressing fraud detection in the insurance sector?
I think it's a broad question. But I mean, if you think about it, they're like.
Sorry, I'm in a webinar that I'm running.
Sorry.
Let's mute you.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's quite a broad question, but if you think about it today, there's that slide that I showed where, automation is happening in new business processes, it's happening in underwriting and claims, it's happening in payments, and, insofar as automated payments, what you've got to think about is you rely on your internal business processes. So how you onboard and do your due diligence of your suppliers, as an example, that get locked into your database and that profile in the background that's used to run the automation. I think that's quite a good enough control in making sure that, from an automation of payments, you're able to cover that. What you'll see is it's way more mature. And I think Brian kind of touched on it. So in some of the other processes are way more mature. If you take new business, underwriting, and claims, I mean, we benefit as an industry from crowdsourced data points. Take new business flows. We use different bureaus to check, for example, clients with history of fraud, people that have certain scores that maybe are an indication of historic fraud issues identified on them. And then we also have access to crime fraud bureaus. I think the insurance industry has even gone further to create a specific one relating to insurance fraud, where anytime fraud issues have happened on a specific ID number or individual, those get updated also onto something like that. So the best way to actually look at fraud is to look at it at an industry level. And I think that's the best way to deal with it, because the one naughty client for one insurance company is the same for the rest of the industry. So I think it's something that we all have to hold our hands together to actually partner and identify individuals like that, because once you can manage your risk pool by not taking in those sort of clients, then it makes it a lot better. Now, back to you, and Brian, I don't know if you want to add.
Sure. So I think I'll highlight maybe 2 or 3 of the most impactful developments that I think have happened in this space over the last, I would say maybe 5-6 years, right? Well, the first one being process embedded controls, right, which is what we've largely what we've spoken about today, where organizations are now moving away from post-event forensic checks and instead embedding fraud prevention logic directly into core business processes, for example, AP, right? And this could include things like real-time duplicate invoice detection, automated vendor validation, threshold-based approvals, segregation of duties, and so forth, right? Well, the second thing would be probably the use of AI and pattern recognition, right? So advanced analytics and machine learning tools are now being used widely, to flag anomalous behavior patterns, such as maybe unusual payment timings, frequencies, or even deviations from invoice values, right? I think Matthew, or was it you, Clifford, who mentioned that earlier on, right? And then also a very common one, which is detecting split transactions, which are designed to bypass approval limits, right? So someone might know that for invoices that are, let's say, under 100K, those ones are usually processed straight through. So those split 2 million into 20 smaller invoices or something along those lines. And then the third thing would probably be cross-system correlation, right? So by integrating data across, say, claims, underwriting, procurement, and finance systems, insurers can now identify fraud schemes that span, multiple functions. For example, collusion between internal approvers and external suppliers. I think automation platforms like Yooz, when aligned with structured process governance, will indeed play a crucial role in surfacing some of these cross-functional risks. I think Matthew can touch on some of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of progress and motion towards fraud prevention. I don't know if I would call it specific to the insurance industry and the things that we've created recently, because it's not an insurance specific problem, right? Fraud is everywhere, and people are trying to do the same things to insurance companies as they are to manufacturing companies, as they are to a variety of other verticals. And when we talked about the deviation, right, where if you're typically getting something that's 100,000 and all of a sudden something comes in for $1 million, or if there's splits, or if there's funny business on the invoice itself, we've developed enough tools and reach that we can read these invoices at a detailed enough level to provide you with valuable feedback to catch these things upstream. Because a lot of the times, what we want to do is catch it before it becomes a problem, right? That's always the goal, is we catch it earlier and earlier and earlier, so that you and your team don't have as many headaches to deal with when something gets out the door. So really, there's been a big emphasis on that, and we know it's becoming more and more prevalent in the market. So we've invested quite a bit of resources into delivering fraud prevention for the whole suite of our customer base. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that response. Hope we have answered your question. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all the time we have for questions today. A huge thank you to Clifford, Brian, and Matthew for sharing your expertise, the IISA for your continued support, and to all of you for joining us. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to ISB Optimus or Yooz. And for today, that will be all from us. We will be sharing with you the webinar recording shortly, and have a great day to everybody. Thank you for joining again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.